On the continuous snow-capped mountains, Ragnar and his son sat on a cliff, looking down on all the peaks. After experiencing countless hardships, Ragnar had finally gone from a mere farmer to the king of the Vikings. Bjorn was already impatient to unleash his vengeance, to raid, to fight. Ragnar smiled slightly. He wanted to ask his son what the purpose of fighting was. After all,
Power. The power of a king.
Ragnar uttered a maxim that he would remember for a lifetime. He had never thought about gaining any power, nor had he thought about becoming a king. What he wanted was only to lead the Vikings to a life of abundance. In this barren land, arable land was scarce and winters were long. It was difficult for people to be self-sufficient. So after the ice and snow melted, he planned to lead the Vikings to migrate to the vast and fertile land of England. After all, Egbert had once promised to give them 5,000 acres of land. As for the power Bjorn spoke of, as long as a person did enough for the people, the so-called power and status would come pouring in. In the blink of an eye, summer arrived. The people who intended to migrate were all preparing to set off for England. Lagertha returned to her territory. Before leaving, she handed over her land to her lover to manage. This lover's name was Kaf. During these days when Lagertha was widowed, it was Kaf who took care of her physical needs, but Lagertha never imagined that this one-time misplaced trust would make her lose her territory. At the same time, Bjorn's girlfriend Porin also wanted to go along and see the world. At this point, she was already pregnant. Fortunately, going to England was for farming, not for war. After failing to dissuade her, Bjorn had no choice but to reluctantly agree. Amid the people's reluctant gazes, dozens of ships loaded with farmers and warriors set off in a grand manner towards England. After dozens of days of tossing on the sea, everyone safely arrived at the Kingdom of Wessex in England. In front of the city gate, Egbert and Quenthrith had long been waiting, but Ragnar discovered a serious problem. The hundreds of Viking warriors he had left here were all gone. At the banquet, Ragnar got straight to the point and asked where the hundreds of Viking warriors had gone.
Unfortunately, the forces of my uncle and younger brother have prevailed. But if you, Ragnar Lothbrok, and you, Lagertha, would join with us, I am sure of victory.
Hvað segir hún?
Hun vill att vi är början. En väg den fyra har lagt mig mycket.
Wir komum hingað til að byggja. Hann býr fyrir að fyrir skólum berja. Og deyja vegna deilið sem þið okkar eiga.
Just as everyone was extremely angry, Egbert said hypocritically, "I promised to give you land, but it was met with opposition from some nobles. If you don't help Quenthrith regain the throne of Mercia, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to explain to the nobles on our side." The reason Egbert was helping Quenthrith was that he wanted Mercia to become his vassal state and pay in taxes every year. It must be said, Egbert's scheme was really beautiful. Without spending a single soldier, he took all the benefits. In order to gain a long-term and favorable cooperation, Ragnar had no choice but to agree to help Quenthrith regain the throne. After discussion, Lagertha took the farmers to cultivate the allocated land. As a person trusted by both kings, Athelstan stayed by Lagertha's side. The others followed Ragnar to Mercia to fight. At the same time, worried that the Vikings would take Mercia for themselves after conquering it, Egbert sent Ethelwulf to lead an army to go with them. With matters arranged, the group officially set off, divided into two routes. On the way, Ragnar asked Quenthrith to introduce her uncle. After all, knowing both yourself and the enemy would ensure victory in every battle.
My uncle's name is Britwulf, though he calls himself King Britwulf now. He has no right to do so. He has usurped my crown.
And your younger brother?
His name is Burgred. We were always close, and I love him.
And why does he fight against you?
My uncle has poisoned his mind or used some magic against him. We will soon be in Mercia, and you must fight for me. And if you are victorious, I promise that I shall give you something worth more than land or riches.
From Quenthrith's hungry eyes, it could be seen that she seemed unusually desirous of this man. Just then, countless arrows suddenly came flying towards them.
Throw him! Throw!
After withstanding the arrow barrage, Ragnar calmly observed the enemy situation. The number of people on the opposite side was several times theirs. If they fought head-on, there was no possibility of winning. Rollo suggested they turn back now while there was still time, but Ragnar seemed confident. He saw a huge flaw in the enemy's battle formation.
The forces on the right bank. much smaller than those on their left. And as far as I can see, there is no bridge. There is no way the two armies can easily rejoin. We attack your uncle. You stay out of our way. Sound the horn! Concentrate the full attack on the right bank. On steel ball!
Seeing all the ships heading towards Bright Wolf's side, Burgred started to panic on this side. He never expected the enemy to not follow the rules and only attack from one side. Burgred ordered his men to angrily shoot arrows at the enemy. Unfortunately, the arrows all landed in the water. At this time, the Viking warriors had already landed. They started crazily slaughtering the enemy. Seeing Bright Wolf's side in crisis, Burgred could only watch helplessly from this side. Before long, Ragnar had annihilated all the troops on Bright Wolf's side. While fleeing, Bright Wolf was personally beheaded by Floki. Seeing the situation was lost, Burgred had no choice but to lead his remaining troops and run. Seeing her own uncle killed, Quenthrith could no longer contain her inner ecstasy, but she seemed unsatisfied and even requested Ragnar to chop off Bright Wolf's head. Ragnar was quite puzzled. Why did she hate her own uncle so much? Quenthrith frowned angrily. For the first time, she told others about her tragic experience.
I was the only member of my family who raped me when I was a child. It was my uncle who first brought him to me. Since I was 6 years old, he abused me. He violated my body and my soul. And he told me not to resist the attentions of the many men that he brought to me, saying that they all wanted the pleasure. They all wanted the pleasure of sleeping with a child. And even when I cried and I said that they were hurting me, they didn't stop. Never stopped.
Ragnar was stunned, so he had Floki cut off Bright Wolf's head. Quenthrith took the head and drove a sharp blade into Bright Wolf's head. After revenge, their next target was Burgred. Across the river, seeing the slowly approaching warships, Burgred immediately ordered preparations for battle, but when they saw clearly the scene on the ships, everyone was shocked silly. They saw that every ship was hung with the heads of Mercian soldiers. Their mental defenses were instantly destroyed. Most of the soldiers turned and ran, fleeing in all directions. Quenthrith called out Burgred's name, hoping he wouldn't run away. She promised not to harm him, but the deputy advised Burgred not to believe the princess's words and to withdraw immediately to save his life. She had killed his brother and would kill him too. Just like that, Ragnar used powerful psychological tactics to scare the enemy into a panicked flight without spending a single soldier. But the Viking tradition was to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Of course, Ragnar wouldn't let Burgred off. After occupying the kingdom of Mercia, Ragnar ordered Ethelwulf to find out where the enemy had fled. Before long, Ethelwulf's pursuers caught a Mercian commander. Under Ethelwulf's friendly negotiation, the other party finally revealed Burgred's movements and deployment. Ethelwulf brought back news of the Mercian army. At this time, they were gathering on a mountaintop waiting for reinforcements. Ragnar immediately ordered the entire army to assemble and officially set off for the target mountaintop tomorrow to capture the enemy in one fell swoop. And during these days when Ragnar was fighting, what was Arlagertha doing? Her unique temperament deeply attracted Ecbert's attention, so Ecbert followed Lagertha to the fief. Seeing such vast and fertile land, Lagertha's heart was filled with joy. After everyone settled in, Ecbert began to frantically court Lagertha. He not only equipped them with production tools but also specially arranged a team of experts to guide their farming. Before he knew it, Ecbert had already stayed here for several days. But a country cannot be without a ruler for a day. So he planned to invite Lagertha to return to the capital together. Unexpectedly, Lagertha readily agreed. After returning to the capital, the relationship between them began to become subtle. Ecbert still launched a frenzied offensive towards Lagertha, even giving her a string of precious gemstone necklaces. And Judith also seemed quite interested in Athelstan. They talked about issues of religious belief. After the meal, Judith even expressed her love to Athelstan under the guise of confession. After staying here for a while, Lagertha prepared to return to the fief to continue farming. Athelstan also left with her. After seeing them off, Egbert asked Judith if she had already fallen in love with Athelstan.
Well, be careful, Judith, who you choose to be fascinated by.
Unexpectedly, Egbert actually encouraged Judith to boldly seek true love. At this time, Ragnar had already found the mountain where Burgred was hiding, but the enemy occupied the high ground, making it difficult for them to charge up. Just as Ragnar was at his wit's end, Thorstein, who had lost an arm in the previous battle, voluntarily stepped forward to attract the enemy's attention and buy time for his brothers to attack. Thorstein used his flesh and blood to withstand the cold arrows. Thorstein's actions left the enemy dumbfounded. After judging there was no threat, the enemy troops went forward to check. At this moment, Thorstein suddenly pulled out the broken arrow from his leg and stabbed it directly into the enemy's chest. In the end, Thorstein died heroically, his soul ascending to Valhalla. At the same time, Ragnar took advantage of the enemy's distraction and led everyone to charge up. They rushed to the enemy's front with lightning speed and engaged them in close combat. Close combat was the Vikings' natural advantage. They crazily slaughtered the helpless enemy. But because it was Porin's first battle and she was too reckless, she eventually fell into a passive position. Just as the enemy was about to kill Porin, fortunately Bjorn discovered it in time and saved her. At this point, Porin had already fainted. Bjorn was extremely anxious to seek help, but when he turned his head to look at the battlefield, another unfortunate event happened before his eyes. Ragnar, clutching his wound, finally fought his way to the top of the mountain. Only now did he discover that the true main force of Mercia had not yet taken action. Seeing Ragnar alone, Burgred thought victory was in hand, so Burgred immediately ordered a general attack. However, what Burgred didn't know was that Ragnar had long ordered Ethelwulf to lie in ambush on the mountaintop. When the soldiers beside him fell one after another, Burgred finally realized they had encountered an ambush. They tried to use shields to block, but it was already too late. Faced with indiscriminate shooting from all sides, Burgred's army had already become a turtle in a jar. With a fresh corpse falling in the wilderness, Burgred had no choice but to give up the resistance.
It's Burgred! It's the Hellsinger!
Although this war ended with Ragnar's victory, the ground was covered with the corpses of Vikings. Floki questioned Ragnar, "Can you tell me what the meaning of our fight was this time? We sacrificed so many brothers, and what did we get in return?"
You all chose to be here. My heart is as heavy for Thorstein as anyone's. But I'm sure that I will bump into him again soon. And in the meantime, Floki, shut your face.
On the other side, seeing the seriously injured Porin, Bjorn also felt very guilty. He said he shouldn't have let Porin face such a cruel battlefield. Ragnar originally wanted to comfort Bjorn, but when he learned that Porin was already pregnant, Ragnar instantly collapsed.
When you let her come, she will probably die with your child in her belly, and it will be your fault. I can't leave you, my son. Can't even look at you.
The biggest beneficiary of this war was only Quenthrith. To save her brother's life, she brought Burgred to seek Ragnar's forgiveness. From Burgred's behavior, it could be seen that he was a very timid and cowardly person. He kept saying that he was encouraged by his uncle. At this time, Ragnar was in a rage and couldn't listen to this at all. So with a headbutt, he directly knocked Burgred down.
I forgive you.
The daughter-in-law and father were taking a bath in the same bathhouse. Not only did they have no awkwardness at all, Egbert even called over Lagertha and Athelstan. The four of them were in the bathhouse, frankly facing each other. It must be said, the speed of their development was indeed surprising. Originally, the atmosphere on the scene was quite harmonious. Unexpectedly, as Lagertha and Egbert chatted, they couldn't restrain themselves a bit. This made Judith on the side a bit embarrassed, so she hurriedly found an excuse to slip away. Athelstan also tactfully followed her out. Athelstan found Judith and pretentiously asked her why she suddenly left when she was enjoying her bath. Judith was a little shy to speak, but she still told Athelstan her true thoughts.
I wanted something to happen between you and me. Right there in the water, in front of them. I didn't care. It was wrong of me. I'm married. I have a child. I'm a Christian.
Nothing happened and you've done no wrong.
Athelstan refused Judith on the grounds that he was a servant of the Lord. This made Judith heartbroken, and she could only leave alone. Athelstan returned and happened to see the intimate scene of Lagertha and Egbert in the bathhouse. On Ragnar's side, after experiencing yesterday's great battle, a deep gash was left on his abdomen. Ragnar lay on the grass, in too much pain to speak. Just then, Quenthrith slowly walked towards him. Quenthrith looked around and found no one, so she shyly lifted her skirt and squatted over Ragnar's wound. Before long, a puddle of liquid appeared on Ragnar's wound. Such a strange way of healing wounds was a first, but from Ragnar's expression, it could be seen that his symptoms seemed to have indeed eased. They talked about Egbert. Quenthrith advised Ragnar not to trust Egbert lightly. Egbert only ever cared about his own interests. Ragnar said he didn't fight for Egbert, he only fought for his people. After chatting for a while, Quenthrith asked about Ragnar's injury again.
It still hurts.
Quenthrith smiled charmingly and told Ragnar to lie down. While Ragnar was being intimate with another woman, little did he know that his wife Aslog would also give him a green hat in return. During these days when Ragnar was away on his expedition, Aslog, who stayed behind, along with Siggy and Floki's wife Helga, all had a strange dream at the same time. They dreamed of a man walking through the snow, but his feet made no sound. In one hand was a burning snowball, and the other hand was full of blood. The blood dripped onto the snow and even gave off smoke. They didn't understand what this meant, until a few days later, a wanderer came to the territory. He sought help from Helga, and the wanderer's right hand was dripping with blood, exactly the same as the scene they saw in the dream. Helga brought this person to Aslog. The three women were all very curious about him. The wanderer said his name was Harbard, although he didn't explicitly say he was a god. His words intentionally or unintentionally mythologized himself, leaving the three women stunned. Over the next few days, Aslog seemed to be under a spell. She didn't even take care of her children and went out every day to find Harbard and have him tell stories of Valhalla. Siggy was relatively calm. She advised Aslog to pay attention to her identity. She was now not only the queen but also the mother of several children, but Aslog wouldn't listen at all. She left the children for Siggy to take care of and hurried out to find Harbard. It must be said, Harbard's skill in deceiving people was indeed impressive. He lured Aslog to a dilapidated room. With just a few simple words, he made Aslog take off her clothes on her own initiative, and even feel that mating with him was her greatest honor. At the same time, Siggy was taking care of three children and couldn't handle it at all. In a moment of inattention, two of the children slipped out. Siggy hurriedly went out to search. She chased after them all the way to the back mountain, only to see the two children walking towards the dangerous ice. No matter how Siggy shouted, the two children completely ignored her. They seemed to be attracted by some mysterious force. Left with no choice, Siggy could only follow, but as soon as she touched the ice, she heard the sound of ice cracking. In a flash, the two kids fell through a hole in the ice. Siggy rushed over without regard for her own safety, but she couldn't see the children anymore. With no time to think, Siggy hurriedly plunged into the icy lake water. Although Siggy rescued the two children, she had stayed underwater for too long and ultimately sank to the bottom of the lake forever. After learning of Siggy's death, the guilty Aslog began to intentionally distance herself from Harbard. Harbard didn't leave immediately, but first went to say goodbye to Aslog. As Harbard was about to leave, Aslog asked who he really was.
Just a wanderer.
Helga chased after him, her eyes fixed on the direction Harbard was leaving. Just then, a white mist suddenly rushed in. When the mist dispersed, the mysterious man from the dream had vanished without a trace. Helga stood there, stunned. This made her realize that this man might really be a god. If you think only Ragnar was cuckolded, then you're still too shallow. After winning the battle, the allied forces began heading towards Wessex. Ethelwulf missed his wife very much. It's just that he didn't know that Judith, who stayed at home, had also prepared a green hat for him. Under Judith's crazy seduction, Athelstan ultimately couldn't resist the temptation, and our Lagertha wasn't idle either. During this time, she was immersed in the joy of carnal pleasure with Egbert every day. Lagertha's charm had already made Egbert unable to extricate himself. He wanted Lagertha to stay by his side and no longer cling to her northern title, but Lagertha was born with the Vikings' fighting blood in her veins. She naturally couldn't indulge in lovemaking. Moreover, Lagertha understood that she and Egbert were just putting on an act for the occasion. Soon, everyone returned to Wessex's capital. Egbert warmly entertained everyone, but power was what Egbert and Ragnar really cared about. On the surface, they cooperated seamlessly, but their words were full of undercurrents. Egbert wanted to control the real power in Mercia, but he couldn't openly seize it. He could only choose to manipulate behind the scenes. Egbert wanted Quenthryth and her brother to jointly rule the kingdom of Mercia and pay him taxes every year, but unexpectedly, at the night banquet, in order to have the throne all to herself, Quenthryth actually personally poisoned her own brother to death. Just like that, Quenthryth became the sole ruler of Mercia.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, please rise and raise your cups to the sole and only ruler of Mercia.
After completing the agreement with Egbert, Ragnar took the Viking troops and prepared to return to the Kattegat Strait. On the ship, Ragnar repeatedly asked Athelstan about Paris, since Athelstan had been there before. Athelstan described the splendor of Paris, the gold everywhere. The abbeys were dozens of times richer than those in England. Ragnar's eyes lit up. It seemed he had already decided on his raiding target for this summer. Seeing them chatting so happily, Floki in the next boat was instantly filled with jealousy. He had always disliked Athelstan, not only because Athelstan was getting closer to Ragnar, but also because Athelstan believed in Christianity, which went against their belief in the Norse gods. And for Floki, belief was his everything. After a few days of tossing, Ragnar's fleet finally returned to the Kattegat Strait. The ground full of wounded made this westward expedition seem a bit battered. Many brothers who had fought shoulder to shoulder didn't make it back alive. Rollo also didn't see Siggy. Aslog's eyes were evasive. She told Rollo that Siggy had died at the bottom of the lake while saving Ragnar's sons. This made Rollo heartbroken. He regretted not treating Siggy well before, but Ragnar's mind was full of questions. He questioned Aslog why it was Siggy taking care of his children. Where had she gone at the time? Of course, Aslog wouldn't mention her infidelity. She lied, saying they took turns taking care of the children. This reason obviously couldn't convince Ragnar. He still wanted to continue questioning Aslog, but she left on the pretext of going to see Porin. The disfigured Porin naturally didn't want to see Aslog either, and spoke in an unfriendly tone. With no other option, Aslog could only go home. As soon as she got home, she began undressing, wanting to be intimate with Ragnar, but Ragnar just wants to know why Siggy is the one taking care of their children and is not interested in sex. This left Aslog with no way to proceed. She could only throw a tantrum, saying Ragnar must have a new love in England and didn't want to touch her anymore. Ragnar had no choice but to relent and not continue to investigate further. But how could paper possibly contain fire? Floki also felt there was more to Siggy's death. Under his questioning, his wife Helga finally told the truth.
He seduced Aslog. She slept with him. It is because of him that she was not looking after the children.
And he said his name was Harbard. You're sure he said that?
Yes, he said that.
As Ragnar's best friend, Floki would definitely tell Ragnar about this, but what made him even more curious was the Wanderer's name, because Harbard was the alias the king of the gods, Odin, liked to use. This made Floki also start to think that this person who slept with Aslog might really be a god. At the same time, bad news reached Lagertha. It turned out that during the days she was on the expedition, her lover Calf had usurped her title and wealth. Lagertha was so angry she was speechless. She never imagined this dog would bite its owner. Lagertha found Ragnar, hoping he could help her regain her title, but Ragnar's words instantly made her heart go half cold. Ragnar claimed he didn't want to start another civil war causing more of their people to sacrifice. He seemed to have long forgotten that Lagertha had once come to his aid in his time of crisis. Unable to resist Lagertha's persuasion through soft and hard tactics, Ragnar had no choice but to perfunctorily say he would go negotiate with Calf together with her in a few days. In fact, at this time, Ragnar's mind was entirely on Paris. He found the seer, wanting to ask what the outcome would be if he attacked Paris this time. The seer told Ragnar,
I can see that not the living, but the dead will conquer Paris. And I also see that the bear will be crowned by a princess, which does not bode too well for you, King Ragnar.
The seer's words didn't seem like a good omen, but nothing could stop Ragnar's desire for Paris. Ragnar gathered everyone and announced the plan to raid Paris this summer. Ragnar's speech had everyone's blood boiling. They all expressed their desire to go to Paris and have a good plunder. Just as everyone was cheering and rejoicing, one person felt he had been deceived.
What about your promise?
What promise?
To visit my earldom, to go to Hedeby, to speak to the usurper.
Left with no choice, Ragnar accompanied Lagertha to Hedeby. Lagertha originally thought Ragnar had come to back her up, but she never imagined that Ragnar would immediately act very warmly towards Kaf and even invite him to go raid Paris together. This instantly petrified Lagertha. She was thoroughly disappointed. She felt like a clown being played by Ragnar. Lagertha was furious with Ragnar's actions. After returning to Ragnar's territory, she left without a moment's stay, and Ragnar didn't take Lagertha's departure to heart at all. Floki found him and laid out a slog's infidelity. However, Floki thought Ragnar should feel honored instead.
Do you not know who Harbard is? Harbard is another name for Odin. It was Odin who slept with his wife, the god Odin who came to Kattegat.
On the other hand, Siggy's death has once again left Rollo in a drunken stupor. Rollo found the seer to express his dissatisfaction. He felt his life had lost all hope, as if all the luck belonged to his brother Ragnar. But he couldn't hate Ragnar, even though his lover died because of Ragnar's 2 children. Upon hearing Rollo's words, the seer actually burst out laughing.
What is there to laugh about?
Rollo, if you truly knew what the gods have in store for you, you would go down now and dance naked on the beach.
I don't understand.
I tell you as I told Ragnar, the bear will marry a princess, and I can tell you that you will be present at the ceremony.
Although Rollo didn't understand the meaning of this sentence now, it at least indicated that he would completely turn his life around in the near future. A wife getting pregnant is definitely good news for the vast majority of men, but what's embarrassing is that Ethelwolf only returned home today after fighting battles abroad for several years. Ethelwolf was so angry he wanted to die. He demanded to know whose child this was. No matter how Ethelwolf questioned her, Judith refused to say a word.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh god.
Just as he was in utter despair, Egbert found him. It turned out an expert who was guiding the Vikings on the fief came to report that the Vikings staying in England to farm had been attacked by the natives. Egbert was very angry. If Ragnar found out, he would definitely bring the Vikings back to settle scores with him. To avoid escalating the situation, Egbert planned to send his son to quell the disturbance and have Ethelwolf take some experienced nobles with him. Ethelwolf accepted the order and set off, but he never imagined he would vent all his pent-up anger on this group of Vikings. Since he didn't know who had cuckolded him, he would let these Vikings be buried along with them. After all, it was their arrival that led to his wife's infidelity. Moreover, the nobles beside Ethelwolf all disliked the Vikings. They all pounced on the village like bloodthirsty wolves. With a scream, a brutal massacre officially began. The defenseless villagers scattered like frightened lambs, but Ethelwolf had no intention of letting them go. Even the few-year-old children who had escaped the fief weren't spared. The slaughter continued into the night. Egbert had originally planned for them to resolve the conflict. He never thought it would turn into quickly exterminating this group of Vikings. Just like that, the homes the Vikings had painstakingly built were ultimately reduced to ashes. News quickly reached the palace. Egbert was instantly furious. They completely disregarded his orders. He had worked so hard to establish a good relationship with the Vikings, only to have it destroyed like this. If Ragnar found out, he would definitely take fierce revenge. The entire kingdom of Wessex would once again fall into crisis. In a fit of rage, Egbert had all the nobles who participated in the massacre taken out and beheaded. Of course, Ethelwolf couldn't escape punishment either. He stood there blankly without a word. It wasn't until Egbert had driven everyone away that the father and son finally revealed devious smiles.
Thank you. Thank you, my son.
It turned out this had all been an act they put on from beginning to end. The Vikings had already helped him seize the kingdom of Mercia. Now they had no more value. On one hand, Egbert used the nobles to get rid of the Vikings on his land. On the other hand, he used the agreement with Ragnar to eliminate the nobles who didn't support him. It must be said, this move of killing two birds with one stone was indeed brilliant. On the other side, Ragnar, who had already returned to the north, was completely unaware of this matter. He was still studying the plan to attack Paris with Athelstan. Athelstan introduced the geographical location and city defenses of Paris to Ragnar. The main city of Paris was situated on an island in the Seine River, surrounded by impregnable giant city walls. There were also arrow towers on the walls. Only one drawbridge connected it to land. Such sturdy defenses couldn't even be described as easy to defend and difficult to attack. It could simply be called an impenetrable fortress. But apparently, there was still nothing in this world that could stop Ragnar's determination to invade Paris. At the same time, Porin was about to give birth. Lagertha, who had left before, also hurried back, witnessed by the whole family. Porin gave birth to a daughter for Bjorn. Just as everyone was immersed in joy, the news of the destruction of the Viking settlement in Wessex finally reached Ragnar's ears. This old farmer was someone who had survived the massacre. He described the tragic scene of the village slaughter to Ragnar. Ragnar was furious. He vowed to make Egbert and his son pay for this blood debt with blood. On the side, Floki voiced the thoughts he had long suppressed. He had always believed that Ragnar's cooperation with Christians was a wrong decision. Floki brought up Athelstan again. He said Athelstan had an inescapable responsibility for why they ended up cooperating with Egbert. But Ragnar didn't think so. He felt it was all his own fault. Floki couldn't understand why Ragnar was so biased towards Athelstan, so he angrily left the room. Afterwards, Ragnar asked the old farmer if anyone else knew about the village massacre. When Ragnar learned there wasn't, he personally strangled the sole person who knew. Ragnar's yearning for Paris had now become crazed. If his people all found out about the village massacre, they would definitely force him to march on England. And Ragnar didn't want anything to ruin his plan to invade Paris in the summer. The harsh winter would soon pass. One night, Athelstan was awakened by a rat while sleeping. Suddenly, he discovered a dazzling beam of light shooting in from the hole. Athelstan was very curious, so he immediately leaned in for a closer look, but was directly repelled by a mysterious force. The camera pulled back. His silhouette clearly formed the shape of a cross. Athelstan, who had repeatedly oscillated between two faiths, was extremely excited. It made him feel the Lord must have accepted him again. At the same time, over in Wessex, Athelstan's son was finally born, but as soon as the baby is born, Ethelwulf sends someone to tie Judith up in public. After Judith suffered being paraded in public and spat on by thousands, she was brought to the execution platform to receive punishment. Egbert watched knowingly. He told Judith to confess who the man was that she cheated with.
Judith, will you not give us the name of the father of your child?
After having one of her ears cut off, Judith could no longer endure the torture and revealed Athelstan's name.
What do you mean it was Athelstan? What can you possibly mean by that?
Athelstan is the father of my child.
Ethelwulf felt this was a great humiliation for him, but Egbert said Athelstan was the most devout Christian he had ever seen. For him to do this, he must have been guided by God, so this child was God's child. His arrival would surely bring miracles. So Egbert named the child Alfred. Does this name sound familiar to you? That's right. This child was none other than Alfred the Great, the future father of England. On the other side, Athelstan had also awakened. At this moment, he seemed to have been reborn. Faith in God became incomparably firm in his heart. He resolutely chose to renounce the Norse gods and even through the warrior's arm ring Ragnar gave him into the sea. And all of this was seen by Floki. As the most devout follower of the Norse gods, he clearly couldn't tolerate someone defiling his gods like this. So the idea of killing Athelstan slowly began to take root in his mind. Floki was known as the Vikings' genius shipbuilder. He could construct impregnable and incredibly swift ships, and also build massive siege equipment. It was precisely because of the existence of such a genius that the Vikings could become the maritime hegemon in medieval Europe, striking fear into the entire continent. But at the same time, he was also an extremely fanatical religious zealot. He didn't allow any faith other than the Norse gods to enter his world. One day, while Floki was building a warship, he suddenly saw blood seeping from the dragon's head in a daze. This made him realize that this might be the god's extreme thirst for blood. He couldn't wait to go kill someone as a sacrifice to the gods, because this was the miracle he had been hoping for day and night. He had already decided on his target. That's right, Floki's target was none other than Athelstan, who had recently renounced the Norse gods. At the moment, Athelstan and Ragnar are meeting a mysterious homeless woman named Sinrik. Ragnar's sunstone and sundial were gifts from Sinrik. Sinrik had traveled to various countries. She not only knew the language of the Franks but also knew the mouth of the Seine River. With her guidance, they could easily reach the foot of Paris. At dusk, Floki took his weapon and came to the Kattegat Strait. His will was unusually firm, because this was the first time he felt he was carrying out the will of the gods. At this time, Athelstan was devoutly praying before the cross. As the most devout follower of Christianity, he seemed to sense that God would take his soul tonight. When he was ready for everything, Floki appeared. Athelstan had no fear, quietly waiting for this moment to arrive. Upon learning the news of Athelstan's death, Ragnar was heartbroken. He carried Athelstan's body to the mountain, intending to bury him in the place closest to God. To him, Athelstan was family, a friend, a confidant with whom he could share anything. Although their faiths were different, in the depths of Ragnar's heart, whether it was love, kinship, or friendship, all transcended faith. To express his deep mourning for Athelstan, Ragnar shaved off his hair and then put on Athelstan's cross pendant. This way, it would make him feel that Athelstan was always by his side. In the blink of an eye, summer had arrived. Knowing Ragnar was going to march on Paris, Viking warriors from other fiefs all came to the Kattegat Strait. Of course, this included Kaf, who had usurped Lajurtha's territory. Kaf also brought two people Ragnar was familiar with. That's right. They were none other than the former King Horik's son Erlender and Jarl Borg's widow Torvi. They were now husband and wife. Lagertha was very displeased to see Kaf, but since they had to fight together next, she still had to be polite on the surface. After preparations were complete, a fleet of hundreds of warships set off grandly towards Paris. This was the Vikings' largest raiding operation to date. Along the way, Ragnar and Floki stared at each other intently. Ragnar knew Athelstan died at Floki's hands, while Floki felt Ragnar wearing that pendant was a desecration of the Vikings' faith. And so it was that they traveled to Paris. When he saw the city of Paris that he dreamed of capturing, Ragnar's eyes burst with the determination to take it even at the cost of his life. At the same time, Count Odo had also discovered the Vikings. He immediately sounded the citywide alarm and rushed to the palace. Hearing that the Vikings had come, the city instantly exploded into chaos. Although they had never seen the Vikings, the common people had all heard that these barbarians were cruel by nature, burning, killing, looting, and committing all kinds of evil wherever they went. Odo arrived at the king's palace. It could be seen that this place was even wealthier than Egbert's, truly a heaven on earth. Count Odo seemed to have some strategy. He had long anticipated the Vikings would come and had even proposed plans to reinforce city defenses, block rivers, and so on, but no one listened. However, he still had a backup plan. Before this, he had stored a large amount of food and drinking water in the city, enough to last the entire summer. As long as they held Paris and didn't leave the city, the Vikings would eventually retreat on their own after failing to capture it. But Odo still advised King Charles to evacuate, just in case.
Allow me a moment to reflect, Count Odo.
Afterwards, Charles went to the rear palace to consult his daughter Gisla. Gisla believed that the king should not abandon his own subjects, and must stay together with his subjects through weal and woe. From this, it could be seen that the king of Paris was a timid and indecisive king. On his daughter's advice, Charles finally announced that he would stay in Paris. On the other side, Ragnar led his troops ashore to set up camp, while Rollo was ordered to go scout the enemy situation. When he approached the city of Paris, he discovered the city walls here were even higher than he imagined. There were also many crossbowmen on top.
Ready, shields!
Rollo had no choice but to slink away with his shield raised. Ever since discovering Ragnar was wearing the cross pendant, Floki had been unable to swallow this fact. He couldn't calm down to study siege engines at all. It should be known that without siege engines, they would never be able to capture Paris. To win Floki's trust, Ragnar handed over command of this raid to him.
I have always believed in you. That is why I want you to be in command of this raid. We have reached Paris. Now, we all want to know what
The king. My oldest friend has asked me to take command. So, how do we best attack the city?
Rollo suggested, our several thousand men can't possibly run through the narrow city gate at the same time. We can launch a simultaneous surprise attack from the water and land routes. One team will raid the castle and city gate, while the others will attack from the water. The ships will be loaded with warriors and climbing tools, then scale the city walls to enter the city, and the large number of siege engines will need to be designed by you, the genius.
No, don't you worry about me, Rollo. I will make something truly astonishing. Just wait and see. All those who agree with the plan, say aye.
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 Floki was overjoyed to be a commander for the first time in his life. He worked day and night like a man possessed, studying siege engines. Before long, one after another, magnificent siege towers and siege ladders were born. You can't imagine that in Europe over 1,000 years ago, there could be a siege battle so full of wisdom and breathtaking. It was precisely after seeing the shocking and thrilling scene that I had the urge to introduce this Vikings series to everyone. In this episode, you will witness a large-scale battle that has gone down in history, the Siege of Paris. I believe after watching, you will definitely be amazed. In that early medieval period when the Vikings dominated, the defensive techniques passed down from ancient Rome were actually as unshakable as towering mountains and rivers, and the Vikings' siege technology was even more remarkable. Before the battle began, first let me introduce the geographical location of Paris at that time and its city defenses. The main city of Paris was situated on an island in the Seine River. Around the river on all sides were impregnable, towering city walls. The city island was connected to the outside land by only one drawbridge. The Parisians guarded the bridgehead, establishing a city tower like a wall of bronze and iron to fend off enemy attacks. This defense couldn't be described as easy to defend and difficult to attack. It could be called an impenetrable fortress, but nothing could stop the Vikings' ambition to raid the city. They gathered 120 warships and over 5,000 brave warriors, preparing to attack the city of Paris in two routes. Because the city gate was too narrow, Lager the Incaf led 500 Viking warriors to focus on attacking the front tower. The rest of the people used the siege equipment made by Floki, planning to directly scale the city walls from the north side of the Seine River and enter the city. At the city gate, Lager led the group to come before the gate with ease and a fierce aura. Crossbow bolts from the tower landed at their feet. Outside the safe zone, Lager ordered her men to stop.
Bring the cage and the run!
As the siege engines on the water route got closer and closer to the city walls, Floki, the temporary commander of this battle, blew the war horn. Under the cover of archers, the small squad at the city gate moved the siege engines step by step towards the gate. This was a protective cage built with wood and iron. The battering ram below and the iron plating were separate, so it was a simple split-type siege cart. The Viking warriors, enduring the enemy's crossbow attacks, finally delivered the split-type siege cart to the front of the city gate. As the people outside retreated, many fell to the crossbow bolts during the retreat. Afterwards, Lager ordered a dozen strong men to carry a giant log and continuously ram the city gate, but it was clear that the material of the gate seemed much sturdier than they imagined. Odo also ordered the soldiers to brace the city gate with a large number of wooden wedges. During this time, they even used boulders to fiercely smash the protective cage. On the other side, the siege equipment and longships full of soldiers had already approached the city walls. They placed wooden planks between the ships so the warriors could quickly and safely get close to the wall. With the concerted efforts of the warriors, a large number of wooden siege ladders were transported to the foot of the city walls. This was something the Parisians had never seen before. This device was composed of 3 parts. The bottom was a wooden raft floating on the water surface. The middle ladder was wide and stable for multiple people to climb. The top consisted of multiple ladders to complete the final ascent to the top of the wall. To prevent the enemy from prematurely destroying it, the ladder needed the rope cut to lean against the wall. Under the cover of archers, batch after batch of Viking warriors climbed the city walls one after another, but it was clear the Parisian soldiers were no pushovers either. From their high position on the city walls, they continuously used crossbows and rocks to smash the Vikings. Seeing wave after wave of warriors climb up only to be knocked down, some Vikings began to feel afraid. Rollo and Bjorn kept directing the soldiers to charge up the walls from below the equipment. Although Ragnar had handed over command to Floki, he was constantly paying attention to how the situation was developing. With a large number of warriors climbing the ladder, some Vikings eventually made it to the walls. Close combat was the natural advantage of the tall and mighty Vikings. They caught the panicked enemy and crazily slaughtered them. At this time, Odo had already arrived on the city walls. Seeing the enemy about to occupy the walls, he disregarded the life and death of the soldiers and himself, insisting on closing the gate of the tower. Seeing the scales of victory had already tipped towards the Vikings, Floki, commanding for the first time, could no longer contain his inner ecstasy. Meanwhile, inside the city of Paris, the people began to pack their things and hide everywhere. King Charles sat trembling in his luxurious palace, worried that the ministers seeing his frightened expression would affect morale. Charles even specially put on a mask. On the other side, Lajertha's progress didn't seem to be going very smoothly. The city gate of Paris was exceptionally sturdy. No matter how they rammed it, they couldn't break it open. Caf ordered his men to bring out 2 huge crossbow bolts, and then he ordered 2 strong men to hammer them in. After unremitting efforts, the arrowheads finally pierced through the city gate. After the arrowheads rotated 90 degrees to get stuck in the gate, Caf ordered the soldiers outside the safe zone to bring over 2 warhorses.
Calf! The ropes!
With the relay of several people regardless of life and death, the rope on the crossbow was finally connected to the ready warhorses. With the warhorses and dozens of strong men exerting force together, the city gate was finally pulled open. But the moment the city gate was pulled open, everyone stood there stunned, because inside the gate, there wasn't a single person, only an empty bridge corridor that made one feel suffocated. Without much thought, the crowd rushed in like a swarm. But halfway through, the battle-hardened Caf finally felt something was off. He told Lagertha to quickly retreat. But how would Lagertha listen to his command? Left with no choice, Caf had to knock Lagertha out with a punch and drag her out. As the drawbridge slowly fell, only then did they discover they were already in a desperate situation. Giant crossbow bolts were shot at the Vikings. In the narrow corridor, they had nowhere to hide. They became sitting ducks for the Parisians, like lambs to be slaughtered. Fortunately, Caf pulled Lagertha out in time, narrowly escaping disaster. And on the front battlefield, even though the Vikings had ascended the narrow and crowded city walls, they couldn't quickly break through the gate on the tower and enter the city. So in the end, it resulted in an overcrowded situation. The large number of Vikings behind couldn't climb the city walls, reaching an impasse. It must be said, the city walls designed by the Parisians were indeed a masterpiece. More crucially, Princess Gisela risked her life to ascend the tower, and she even brought a flag dyed with blood, vowing to advance and retreat together with the warriors. This action undoubtedly brought immense confidence to the soldiers.
Behold the Oriflamme! Behold the sacred flag of Saint-Denis! Behold the sacred flag of Francia! Behold, soldiers of Christ! That wherever the Oriflamme is, into no quarter is to be given to our enemies! Soldiers! Show no mercy! Fight on!
After a speech by Gisela, all the Parisian warriors suddenly seemed divinely assisted. The fear in their hearts vanishing, they began to counterattack with no regard for their lives. The Parisian warriors pushed all the Vikings who had originally climbed the city walls off. This was probably the power of faith. Seeing wave after wave of Viking soldiers shot down, the corpses at the foot of the city walls had already piled into a small hill. Floki began to panic. He seemed to sense that the scales had already tipped to the Parisian side, but what made him even more desperate was yet to come. Odo ordered hot oil to be poured down the ladder from a sling. Countless Viking warriors were scalded by the hot oil. The entire battlefield was instantly filled with wails. A burning arrow was shot at the siege ladder. In an instant, the entire siege equipment was engulfed in raging flames. Floki never imagined that the wooden siege ladders he was so proud of would ultimately become his biggest mistake. At this time, Rollo and Bjorn were still continuously directing the remaining Viking warriors to climb the city walls. But many people had already lost hope. Not wanting to make any more fearless sacrifices, a warrior refused to climb, but Rollo ended his life with an axe. Seeing the city wall remain unbreached after a long attack, the unwilling Rollo chose to climb up himself. After evading all kinds of attacks, Rollo reached the edge of the wall and engaged in a life-and-death struggle with the Parisian army. Bjorn also climbed up on another piece of equipment. Ragnar saw all of this. He rushed up. After all, with defeat imminent, he didn't want his son's life to be lost here too. On the city wall, Rollo fought against 10. Seeing such a valiant man for the first time in her life, Gisela was instantly stunned. The Parisian soldiers couldn't beat Rollo, so they could only cut the ropes of the siege equipment. Just like that, Rollo heavily fell into the Seine River, his life and death unknown. Anxious to save his son, Ragnar rushed up the city wall. On the walls, Bjorn is fighting to kill the enemy, but in the end, 2 fists are not enough. Fortunately, Ragnar rescued Bjorn in time, but Ragnar fell into the enemy's encirclement. In the life-and-death struggle, Ragnar took a glance at the prosperous city of Paris, so close at hand. His eyes were filled with longing and unwillingness. In the end, Ragnar also fell from the city wall, landing in the pile of dead Viking warriors' corpses, accompanied by Ragnar's fall from the wall. This siege of Paris that went down in history ultimately ended with the Vikings' crushing defeat. At this moment, Floki looked at the flames around him and he broke down. Faced with such a rout, he had no face to see the Viking people again. So Floki picked up a dagger, preparing to end himself. In the last moment of his life, a warrior burned beyond recognition let out a heart-wrenching howl. This made the frightened Floki hesitate in the end. After the great battle, upon seeing the mountainous corpses piled in the corridor, King Charles finally understood that the Vikings weren't as terrifying as imagined.
Now that I see them up close, they seem so much less frightening than I suppose. Indeed, they appear almost human.
It's hard to imagine that in the cold weapon era over 1,000 years ago, someone could actually research and develop such large-scale lethal weapons full of ingenuity. At Count Odo's command, a huge wheel full of iron spikes rushed towards the Viking warriors on the promenade. Seeing such a terrifying thing for the first time, the Viking warriors were so frightened they immediately turned tail and fled. But since this was an enclosed bridge corridor, many warriors in the front were still crushed and pierced. The terrifying thing about this spiked wheel meat grinder was that people didn't die immediately after being crushed. The heart-wrenching screams also stimulated every person still alive. But soon, Floki seemed to discover the drawback of this spiked wheel meat grinder. This thing relied on inertia to slide on a track. Once it encountered resistance and stopped, it needed manpower to control the iron chain to pull the wheel back. Rollo stepped forward. He took a long crossbow bolt, stripped off his upper body, and flipped over the spiked wheel meat grinder. Then he stuck his long crossbow bolt in the ground, blocking the spiked wheel meat grinder. No matter how Odo shouted, The control device couldn't retract the wheel. At the same time, a large number of Viking warriors flipped over the spiked wool meat grinder and charged towards the city of Paris. It seemed the scales of victory had already tipped to the Vikings' side. But how did they cross the city gate, like a wall of bronze and iron, and enter the bridge corridor? Just a few days ago, the siege of Paris with Floki as commander had ended in failure. The Vikings' casualties were countless. Ragnar had also fallen from the city wall. Although Ragnar fell into a pile of corpses and barely saved his life, the impact still injured his kidneys. Even his urine was blood red. Ragnar didn't tell anyone about this. He felt his days were numbered. So he found Floki, wanting to have a heart-to-heart talk with him. At this time, Floki was still immersed in self-blame. He still couldn't believe that despite his devotion to the gods, he was ultimately abandoned by them. Floki, bare-chested, seemed so small and helpless. Ragnar didn't blame Floki too much. He just told Floki he wouldn't give up invading Paris. Tonight, he would arrange a sneak attack. As night fell, Lagertha took a few shield maidens and quietly snuck into the corridor on the Seine River. They made no sound and didn't alert any guards. Under the cover of darkness, they eliminated the enemies on the corridor one by one. The enemy's crossbow bolts followed closely behind, but faced with this predicament, Lagertha directly picked up the torch beside her and ignited the hot oil. The flames burned down the city gate, and outside the quiet gate, a large number of Viking soldiers had long gathered there. Just like that, Lagertha used the smallest sacrifice to breach the city gate that had been difficult to take down before. The Vikings rushed towards the corridor like wolves and tigers, but they didn't expect the Parisians' defense to be an impenetrable fortress. They brought out their ultimate weapon, the spiked wool meat grinder, to resist the Vikings' attack. Fortunately, Rollo found the flaw in this thing and led the Vikings to charge towards the city of Paris. This was the second time Gisela saw Rollo. She never imagined there could be such a brave man in the world. Seeing this scene, Odo began to panic. He hurriedly went to find King Charles. He hoped the king could put on armor and personally go to the front line to boost morale. But Charles was a timid and cowardly person. He said it would be useless for him to go. With his daughter there, it was enough. Odo had no choice but to return to the battlefield with a stiff upper lip. On the way back, he happened to meet the king's imperial guards. These people all expressed their willingness to be deployed by Odo, so a large number of soldiers poured to the city gate, and the two sides engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat. In an instant, the entire narrow corridor was crammed with people, packed in layers, letting nothing through. A few brave warriors killed their way out from the gaps between people. The crowded space made it hard for them to even swing their axes. Facing the human sea tactics of the Parisians, Rollo knew that they could never break into the city this way. So in order to cut losses in time, he ordered everyone to retreat collectively. The Parisians raised the drawbridge. In the end, that old woman named Cynric was captured and became a prisoner, because Cynric knew the Frankish language and was also knowledgeable about Viking affairs. Odo did not kill her. Odo brought Cynric before Charles to be judged. Cynric told Charles that she didn't belong to any country or nation, she was just a wanderer. Charles felt keeping Cynric seemed useful, so he didn't kill her. Odo asked Cynric who that brave warrior was who single-handedly destroyed the device. He had never seen such a powerful person before. Cynric replied,
"His name is Rollo. He is the brother of King Ragnar, the leader of the Northmen. He is a famous warrior. He fights like a crazy bear."
Cynric describes Rollo as being like a giant bear gone mad when he fights. I wonder if everyone remembers what the seer once told Rollo about the bear and the princess's wedding. It seems Rollo's good fortune will soon arrive. At the same time, while the Vikings were attacking Paris, Egbert in England also encountered a headache. It turned out that just like Egbert destroying the Viking settlement, Quenthrith also went back on her word. She no longer acknowledged herself as a vassal state of Wessex. Not only was she unwilling to pay taxes to Egbert, she even killed the nobles Egbert sent to the kingdom of Mercia. Egbert was furious and sent Ethelwulf to threaten Quenthrith that if she didn't continue paying taxes, they would meet on the battlefield. Ethelwulf went on orders. Quenthrith didn't beat around the bush either and directly had a servant bring out a child in swaddling clothes.
Prince Magnus. Hello, darling.
That is a northern name, that is not one of ours.
How clever you. Yes, he's named after his father.
His father?
I think you may know him. Ragnar Lothbrok.
It turned out this child was the one she had with Ragnar. Quenthrith dared to turn against Egbert precisely because she was relying on Ragnar, but what she didn't know was that the Viking settlement was long gone. Egbert had already broken with Ragnar.
In which case it would inconvenience us a great deal if we were to find a ready ally here in Mercia. He cannot help you, and you can't threaten us with him.
Knowing her relationship with Ragnar couldn't threaten Egbert, Quenthrith could only obediently pay taxes. Ethelwulf completed his mission, but he didn't know he had been cuckolded again. The one who cuckolded him this time was none other than his father. Egbert promised to protect Judith and his young son, but Judith had to pay a price. As for what that price was, it couldn't be more obvious.
I want you to be my mistress.
Then you will protect Alfred. Look after him.
Get into the bed.
Although they had lost over 1,000 men and horses, Ragnar didn't give up his desire to invade Paris. He ordered the remaining troops to camp at the city gate of Paris, with no intention of withdrawing at all. Odo, besieged inside the city, was at his wit's end. Originally, the city's food reserves were already very short, and now they encountered a large-scale plague. A large number of people died in this plague. If this continued, the Vikings wouldn't need to invade, they would perish on their own. Odo found the king and explained the current predicament. Although the defense of Paris was impenetrable and the Parisians had been victorious in both battles, the Vikings clearly had the advantage in numbers. If they went out of the city for a direct confrontation, they had no chance of winning. Odo suggested negotiating. Since the Vikings' goal was to raid the city, they should compensate them with some gold to send these Vikings away. But Gisla didn't agree. She said civilized people shouldn't submit to barbarians. They had a heated argument. King Charles also couldn't make up his mind, so he decided to listen to God's will at church the next morning. On the Vikings' side, the successive defeats had lowered their morale. They had tried direct confrontation and night raids, but just couldn't take Paris. Just as they were thinking about which part had gone wrong, a group of Parisian soldiers brought Cynric to the Vikings' camp. It turned out Charles had ultimately chosen to negotiate. It could be seen that Ragnar's health was already very weak at this time. He could only lie down to receive the envoy.
King Ragnar, the Franks want to discuss a way to end the siege.
Why?
They don't believe you are capable of breaching the city walls.
I say we are. And what will they give us if we lift the siege?
That would be decided at a meeting between you and the commander of the city, Count Odo.
After stating the specific terms of the negotiation, the envoy prepared to leave with Cynric, but Rollo walked up and directly cut the rope the envoy was leading. Faced with this giant bear-like warrior, the envoy showed fear on his face. Terrified, he had no choice but to obediently release Cynric and then slink away. After the Parisians left, the Viking side instantly erupted. Aside from Ragnar, not a single person was willing to accept the negotiation. They insisted on attacking into the city. Even if they couldn't break in, they would starve them out. Ragnar endured the severe pain and stood up, declaring to everyone who was the king of the Vikings.
I did not become king out of ambition, but once again, I had no choice. As a result of other people's actions. And as a ruler, I have the last say. Me! With no more discussion, we shall meet the Franks tomorrow.
Early the next morning, Rollo discovered Ragnar was gone. Without a doubt, Ragnar must have taken people to the city of Paris alone to negotiate, so the crowd immediately chased after him. At this time, Ragnar was weakly meeting Odo, leaning on a wooden staff. Neither side wasted words. Odo asked right away how much money it would take for them to leave. Was 5,760 pounds of gold enough? Then he said their reinforcements would arrive soon. Hearing this, Ragnar instantly laughed. You won't have any reinforcements at all, and 5,760 pounds of gold and silver is too little. I have another important thing I need your help with. But for you, it should be worthless. Odo asked what it was. Ragnar said,
I want to be baptized.
Si va che baptizzate levet set.
And when I die,
I want to be reunited with my Christian friend, who happens to be in your heaven.
Non el paradis. He says you will go to hell, not heaven.
Ragnar went up and caressed the priest. Then he made the priest baptize him right there. The priest placed Ragnar in the river water to perform the baptism ceremony. Ragnar missed Athelstan so much that he wanted to convert to the enemy's god, and this scene was seen by Lagertha and the others who had hurried over. Floki was furious. He instantly collapsed. For the Vikings, Ragnar's action was a complete desecration of the gods, and after the baptism, Ragnar's entire mental state seemed to have been reborn. Not long after, the Parisians fulfilled their promise and sent over 5,760 pounds of gold. They hoped the Vikings would also keep their promise to leave Paris and return to their own land. Rollo told Ragnar this news, but Ragnar said it had nothing to do with him, because he felt his days were numbered. In the evening, the Vikings sang and danced, celebrating this victory. Although they had lost over 1,000 people, this war was undoubtedly also a bountiful harvest. Just as the Vikings were celebrating, Ragnar called Bjorn to his room and gave him a special task.
I have something I only trust you to do for me.
Ragnar's health was deteriorating day by day. He had already started instructing Floki to build him a coffin. What this meant went without saying. In the blink of an eye, a month passed. Odo stood on the city tower, looking at the Vikings' camp. Seeing they showed no intention of leaving, Odo decided to go investigate for himself. After all, the negotiation was his idea. Arriving at the Vikings' camp, Odo directly asked, "We already gave you the money. Why aren't you leaving yet?"
Our king, my father Ragnar Lothbrok, is too weak and ill to travel.
Malazes Ragnar Lothbrok, nostra rais sis peres, patrova affeblisant, cheminer nipued.
Was est?
Oi, morvalets.
Odo enters the house and finds Ragnar lying on the bed dying. Bjorn said to Odo, "My father has one more request. He wants a Christian funeral. If it can't be held, the Vikings will not leave." Seeing the weak Ragnar and thinking back to Ragnar's baptism, Odo finally agreed to Ragnar's request. That night, a sorrowful melody resounded through the Vikings' camp. Bjorn sat by the fire, silently weeping. Even the Parisian soldiers on the city walls could feel the sadness through the singing. Ragnar lay peacefully in the coffin. Bjorn closed the lid and told the people standing outside they could talk to Ragnar, meaning to say their final true feelings. The first to come bid farewell to Ragnar was his ex-wife Lagertha. Lagertha didn't want Ragnar to go to heaven, because then they couldn't meet in Valhalla. Lagertha said she had always loved Ragnar and never stopped. Only in a situation like this could Lagertha speak her true feelings without reservation. Then it was Rollo. He said he had always hated Ragnar, from childhood to adulthood. Ragnar was everyone's pride. He seemed so superfluous. He also said Ragnar was just an ordinary mortal. Rollo's words contained more reluctance to part. The last was Floki. He had always followed Ragnar. Floki loved him and hated him. It was Ragnar who ignited his desire for battle. At the same time, Ragnar betrayed the Norse gods, the faith he was willing to defend with his life. The next day, amid everyone's farewells, Ragnar's coffin was carried into the great hall inside the city of Paris. The king of Paris and the ministers were all in the hall. They held a grand Christian funeral for Ragnar, but the next second, a terrible thing happened before their eyes. Ragnar jumped out of the coffin and then took out his dagger, holding it to Charles's throat. At the same time, the Viking warriors who were carrying the coffin grabbed the weapons they had hidden inside the coffin and held the princes and nobles hostage. When he saw the priest beside him who had once cursed him to go to hell, Ragnar stabbed the man's throat. This scene stunned Charles. Charles never expected the cunning Ragnar to infiltrate the royal palace of Paris by feigning his own death. However, Gisela wasn't scared by the ruthless Ragnar. She rushed up, trying to rescue her father, but she was grabbed by the throat by Ragnar and ultimately became a hostage. Ragnar and the accompanying warriors took Gisela and headed out of the city. Charles directly fainted from fright. When they reached the bridge corridor, Ragnar immediately ordered his men to cut the ropes of the city gate's drawbridge. This meant the Vikings could charge straight in and enter the city of Paris unimpeded. The men opened the city gate. A large wave of Viking warriors had long been waiting here. Halfway through, Ragnar suddenly released Gisela. Gisela stood there, not daring to move rashly. In her heart, the Vikings were a group of demons who killed without batting an eye. But at this moment, her impression of these barbarians finally changed slightly. At the city gate, Bjorn waved his hand and the Vikings rushed into the city of Paris like wolves and tigers. Just like that, Ragnar broke through the city gate of Paris that had been difficult to take down before. Without spending a single soldier, the weak Ragnar walked out. Only at this moment did he finally collapse into his son's arms with relief. Seeing Ragnar come back from the dead, Lager the Rollo and Floki didn't know whether to be happy or angry about being deceived, but they still decided to settle the score with Ragnar after returning. The Vikings rushed into the city, burning, killing, and looting everywhere. They vented the emotions they had suppressed these days without restraint. After a round of plundering, they quickly left. At this moment, Charles was so scared he was still collapsed on the ground, eyes vacant. It wasn't until he heard Odo say the Vikings had left after looting that Charles slowly stood up. Back at camp, they're all furious with Ragnar for faking his death. They had said so many sincere words, all heard by Ragnar. This completely deceived their feelings, and only Bjorn knew about Ragnar's trick. Wasn't this clearly showing distrust in everyone? Bjorn said he was only acting according to his king father's orders. The king's orders couldn't be disobeyed, but at least the goal of breaking through Paris was achieved, so it could be considered perfect. Seeing that everyone didn't say anything more, Bjorn began to convey his king father's decree. Tomorrow, they would pull up camp and return to the Kattegat Strait. They would come back to Paris to loot next spring, to guard against future troubles. Father Ragnar hoped to leave some people here and also needed a leader to defend the place.
I will stay.
No. You'll have no reason to stay here, Floki.
And what reason do you have, Uncle? Then 'tis decided.
The reason Rollo chose to stay was self-evident, because he wanted to see what the bear and princess's wedding the seer spoke of actually prophesied. On the other side, upon learning the Vikings hadn't all left, Charles was on pins and needles every day. Feeling deeply apprehensive and fearful, he felt he should do something to resolve next year's crisis. So Gisela became the sacrificial victim of this political marriage. He wanted to give his daughter's hand in marriage to Rollo in exchange for lasting peace in Paris. Gisela strongly opposed, but in the end, the arm couldn't twist the thigh.
You will be offered a vast area of land in the northern part of Francia. The Emperor will also make you a duke, the highest honor he can bestow. You will be very rich and you will be very important.
When the messenger said that King Charles had promised Rollo land and titles, Rollo's face didn't make a ripple. It wasn't until the messenger said Princess Gisela would marry him that a rare smile appeared on Rollo's face. You may not understand the meaning of this sentence yet. The Parisians' intention was for Rollo to betray Ragnar and help Paris resist the Vikings' attacks. Rollo gave a cold laugh. He wanted to see if this princess was really worth him betraying his brother for. King Charles held a grand ceremony in the palace to welcome Rollo. But who knew? Gisela would scold Rollo to his face in front of everyone.
Qu'est-ce que disent mes pères, tel Bestaille ne prendrait mis à père. Fille de grand lignage suis, non de folle pute garçonnière. Ni elles audrait de vivre qu'à s'offrir que telle glotte des putères matochaste. Païen est, de ville estras, si amnade, tel totes besternez. Azors guignon et as brognon, mi elles audrait mon pucelage par puterie livrée qu'ad isestui gosse vilain. Pas trop méords. Gossier cuide.
But unexpectedly, Rollo liked women with such a fierce temper. In Princess Gisela, he seemed to see the shadow of Lager, the woman he had longed for but could never have.
J'avoue, salut.
On the ship heading back, Ragnar called for Floki. He stared straight at Floki and said,
You killed those 10.
Floki remained silent. He had already read from Ragnar's fierce gaze what would be waiting for him next.